welcome back to Stormi Talks True Crime on my Girls Rock Productions channel. Now, I first want to apologize for the long hiatus between this video and my previous one. I had some issues juggling the full-time job, editing and writing scripts, and recording for videos, as well as taking care of 2 toddlers. So hopefully I will be able to get these out on a more consistent basis from here on out, but if not, I do apologize. Now, I did write the script for this video a few months back, so it is going to be a little late on the topic, but I decided to write and do this video because at that time this alleged murder decided to take to TikTok to kind of plea her case, but I wanted to give Gen Z and the younger millennials the real story behind Caylee Anthony, and that should explain why Casey Anthony is the social pariah that she is today. Now, this case does involve the crime against a young child, so if that is something that would bother you, I would advise you wait for next week's video. I'm going to start by giving the background on Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony was born March 19th, 1986 in Warren, Ohio to George and Cindy Anthony, making her a Pisces. She was considered a bright and personable young girl with friends in a typical American family. However, friends say that a pattern of lying began when Anthony was in high school. Cindy and George attended Anthony's graduation along with Anthony's grandparents, only to discover that she was several credits short of graduating. Anthony had stopped attending classes towards the end of the school year, but led her family to believe that she would walk with the graduating class. When she was 19, Anthony gave her family another shock. She had put on weight, and her parents suspected she was pregnant. Anthony denied it, claiming she was a virgin. Months into her pregnancy, she told her parents the truth. The identity of the baby's father, however, remained a mystery. Anthony pointed to different men, including her fiancé, Jesse Grund, as well as a young man she had dated previously who died in a car crash. On August 9, 2005, Caylee Anthony was born, making Caylee a Leo. A friend of Anthony's said that she had discussed giving the baby up for adoption, but was discouraged by her mother. For the next few years, Anthony and Caylee lived with her parents, and Grund acted as the technical baby's father. Grund even believed Caylee might be his baby, despite knowing that the timing of her conception made it improbable. A DNA test would later find that Grund was not Caylee's father. The identity of Caylee's father remained unknown. In mid-June 2008, with her suitability as a mother called into question by Cindy, Casey left her parents' home after a major argument, taking Caylee with her. Over the ensuing weeks, Cindy called her daughter to check on Caylee. Each time, Casey told her that the little girl was out with a babysitter, Zenaida, aka Zanny, Fernandez-Gonzalez. On July 13th, 2008, Cindy and George received a letter saying that Casey's car was in a tow yard. When George went to pick up the car, he found Casey's purse along with Caylee's car seat and toys. George noticed a strong smell like that of organic matter decomposing coming from the trunk. Alarmed, Cindy found Casey at the home of her boyfriend, Tony Lazaro, and brought her home. Casey broke down, telling her mother and brother Lee that she had left Caylee with the nanny, Zenaida Fernandez-Gonzalez, in Orlando on June 16th, and that Gonzalez had kidnapped the toddler. On July 15, 2008, Caylee was reported missing in a 911 call made by Cindy, who said she had not seen the child for 31 days. According to what Cindy told police dispatchers, Casey had given varied explanations as to Caylee's whereabouts before eventually saying that she had not seen her daughter for weeks. Casey later called the police and falsely told a dispatcher that Caylee had been kidnapped by a nanny on June 9th. Casey was charged with first-degree murder October of 2008 and pleaded not guilty. On December 11, 2008, Kaylee's skeletal remains were found in a blanket inside a laundry bag in a wooded area near the Anthony family residence. Investigative reports and trial testimony varied between duct tape being found near the nose and mouth of the skull. The medical examiner listed Kaylee's cause of death as homicide by undetermined means. The state of Florida sought the death penalty in its case against Casey, relying largely on circumstantial evidence, which is where I think the prosecutors went wrong. When they couldn't get any solid forensic evidence on cause of death, they should have at least given the option of life without parole instead of just going solely for the death penalty. Though, don't get me wrong, she did deserve the death penalty, in my personal opinion. But the death penalty on nothing other than circumstantial evidence isn't as common in the modern age. But they decided to go ahead with that death penalty. The prosecution would allege that Casey wished to free herself from her parental responsibilities and murdered her daughter by administering chloroform and applying duct tape to her nose and mouth. Casey's defense team, led by Jose Baez, chiefly focused on challenging the prosecution's evidence, calling much of it fantasy forensics. The defense stated that Kaylee had drowned accidentally in the family's swimming pool and that George had disposed of the body, basically throwing her father under the bus. Now remember, this isn't the first lie that she told. She originally told authorities that Kaylee was kidnapped by the nanny. Well, that lie fell through when it came out that Zanny didn't exist. But there was really a woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, so that woman ended up getting fired from her job due to Anthony's lies and would sue Casey in civil court. This lie fell through when Casey brought investigators to the apartment she claimed to have dropped Kaylee off on the day of her kidnapping. But when police investigated the apartment, they found it had been abandoned for more than 140 days. Oopsie. Another lie that she got caught in throughout the investigation was that she was working at Universal Studios. However, when investigators took her to Universal Studios on July 16th and asked her to show them her office, Casey led detectives into the building before admitting she no longer worked there. It would actually come out that she had not worked there since she had taken maternity leave almost 3 years earlier. This whole time, Casey's parents were maintaining their belief that Kaylee was alive and would be found, which contradicts Casey's story that George disposed of the body. Casey was subsequently arrested. While her daughter was supposedly still missing, Casey also was engaging in some pretty suspicious activities for a worried and grieving mother. She was constantly seen out at the bars, living it up, and even got a new tattoo, Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful life. And here we are back at December 11, 2008, when a meter reader by the name of Roy Kroon would report to the police a suspicious object that he had found in a wooded area near the Anthony residence. When the police would come and search the area, they would find the remains of a child in a trash bag. Investigative teams recovered duct tape, which was hanging from hair attached to the skull, and also some tissue left on the skull. Over the next 4 days, more bones were found in the wooded area near the spot where the remains initially had been discovered. On December 19, 2008, medical examiner Jan Garavaglia confirmed that the remains found were that of Kaylee Anthony. The death was ruled a homicide. So now we are back up to the current lie, which is that Kaylee accidentally died in a drowning. But what mother wouldn't call 911 in that situation? Add to that, George denies any of this ever happened. But Anthony's team had an answer for that as well. She would claim that her father was SAing her from her childhood to discredit his character, another thing that George and Cindy vehemently deny. And with Casey's history of lying, it's surprising that anybody would really believe her at this point. Jury selection began on May 9, 2011 at the Pinellas County Criminal Justice Center in Clearwater, Florida, because the case had been so widely reported in Orlando area. Jurors were brought in from Pinellas County to Orlando. Jury selection took longer than expected and ended on May 20th with 12 jurors and 5 alternates being sworn in. The panel comprised of 9 women and 8 men. The trial took 6 weeks, during which time the jury was sequestered to avoid any influence from the information available outside the courtroom. The trial began on May 24, 2011 at the Orange County Courthouse with Judge Melvin Perry presiding. The opening statements, lead prosecutor Linda Burdick described the story of Kaylee's disappearance day by day. Prosecutors stated that Casey used chloroform to incapacitate Kaylee before suffocating her with duct tape, leaving the body in the trunk of her car before disposing of it. The defense, led by Baez, said Anthony had likely accidentally drowned in the family's pool on June 16, 2008, and that George had, with Casey's knowledge, covered up the drowning in order to spare his daughter a potential child neglect charge. The defense further said that Casey's seemingly unaffected behavior after Kaylee's death was attributable to the child abuse she had allegedly suffered at the hands of her father and at this point also her brother. Finally, the defense stated that police investigation had been compromised by the media frenzy. Now, if you go to my Patreon, you would have more details into both the prosecution and defense's witnesses and also forensic analysis going into the case. But here we're just going to sum it up with their closing arguments, which were given on July 3rd and 4th. Now, Ashton, for the prosecution, reiterated the state's belief that Casey Anthony had killed Kaylee to free herself of parental duties, saying, "When you have a child, that child becomes your wife. This case is about the clash between that responsibility and the expectations that go along with it, and the life that Casey wanted to have." He emphasized Casey's false claims, including her claims regarding Fernandez Gonzalez, the smell in the car, and the items found with Kaylee's remains. Ashton called the defense's theory of accidental drowning absurd. He said no one would make an accident look like a murder. Baez was not allowed to address the abuse claims given the lack of evidence presented at the trial. So he emphasized the circumstantial nature of the prosecution's case, saying the state's allegations were based on fantasy computer searches, fantasy forensics, fantasy stickers, phantom stains, not on real hard evidence. Baez said there was a reasonable hypothesis of innocence in light of the possibility that Casey drowned, further contending that the drowning was the only explanation that made sense, a point he illustrated with a video of Casey opening a home sliding glass door, which did not have a child safety lock, by herself. He criticized the prosecution for their heavy use of character evidence, saying the strategy behind that is if you hate her, if you think she's a lying, no-good slut, then you'll start to look at the evidence in a different light. Defense attorney Mason followed, emphasizing the burden of proof and which side bore it. Casey Anthony is not required to present evidence or prove anything, he said. The burden rests on the shoulders of my colleagues at the state's attorney's office. In rebuttal, the lead prosecutor, Burdick, said that the state had backed up the claims from its opening statements with evidence. She pointed to Casey's actions after Kaylee's disappearance, saying, "Responses to grief are as varied as the day is long, but responses to guilt are, oh, so predictable. What do guilty people do? They lie, they avoid, they run, they mislead, not just to their family, but the police. They divert attention away from themselves, and they act like nothing is wrong. Verdict denied Baez's charge that the prosecution had based its case on emotion rather than evidence. She then ended her rebuttal by showing the jury side-by-side pictures of Casey partying and a tattoo she received the day before Kaylee was reported missing. The jury began deliberations on July 4th. On July 5th, prosecutors stated that during deliberations, they were about to give the jury the corrected information with regard to Bradley's software discrepancy. However, the jury reached a verdict before they could do so. One legal analyst stated that if the jury had found Casey guilty before receiving the exculpatory evidence, the prosecution's failure to fully disclose it could have been grounds for a mistrial. On July 5, 2011, the jury found Casey not guilty of counts 1 through 3 regarding first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and aggravated child abuse, while finding her guilty on counts 4 through 7 for providing false information to law enforcement. The guilty counts pertain to Casey's false statements that she 1. Worked for Universal Studios, 2. Employed Fernandez Gonzalez as a nanny, 3. Had told 2 Universal Studios co-workers that Kaylee had disappeared, and 4. Had spoken by phone with Kaylee after Kaylee went missing. Now, this case attracted significant media attention. The trial was commonly compared to the O.J. Simpson murder case, both for its widespread press coverage and initial shock at the not guilty verdict. The New York Post described the trial as going from being a newsworthy case to one of the biggest rating draws in recent memory, and Time magazine dubbed it the social media trial of the century. The Anthony case was regularly the main topic of many television talk shows, including those hosted by Greta Van Susteren, Nancy Grace, and Geraldo Rivera. It was featured on America's Most Wanted, Dateline, and 2020. Grace, who referred to Casey as the top mom and made her belief in Casey's guilt clear, was in particular credited with almost single-handedly inflating the Casey Anthony case from a routine local murder into a national obsession. After the verdict, Grace announced to her audience that the devil is dancing. Now, after the verdict, Mason criticized talking heads who had indulged in media assassination during the timeline of the case. I can tell you that my colleagues from coast to coast and border to border have condemned this whole process of lawyers getting on television and talking about cases that they don't know a thing about and don't have the experience to back up their words or the law to do it. Now, you have learned a lesson. Mason's response was viewed as especially critical of Grace. Asked about Mason's comments, Grace said, "If for some chance Channy Mason is referring to me, no, I really don't care what the personal feelings of one of Top Mom's defense attorneys are about me." In an anonymous interview, juror number 11, the jury foreman, stated that a feeling of disgust came over him when he wrongly thought that his signature and Casey's signature were going to be on the verdict sheet. The foreman said that the state's failure to prove the cause of death and suspicion regarding the role Casey's father, George, had played, both factored into the jury's deliberations. In another interview, the foreman stated that the jury had been skeptical of the offered motive for the alleged killing. That a mother would want to do something like that to her child just because she wanted to go out and party. The motive that the state provided was, in our eyes, was just kind of weak. The foreman said that in an initial poll, the jury voted 10-2 in favor of the not guilty verdict, and after more than 10 hours of deliberation, they collectively decided the only charges proven were the 4 counts of lying to law enforcement. In 2021, one juror said he regretted his decision to fully acquit Anthony of homicide and abuse, and said that in retrospect he would have at least voted to convict her of aggravated manslaughter and of a child and of aggravated child abuse. He said of his vote to acquit Anthony on all of the most serious charges, "I don't know what the hell I was doing." Mark Lippin, the attorney for George and Cindy Anthony, told ABC News that the family received death threats after the not guilty verdict was rendered. In response to the verdict, a statement was released by Lippin on behalf of the Anthony family. While the family may never know what has happened to Kaylee Marie Anthony, they now have closure for this chapter of their life. They will now begin the long process of rebuilding their lives. Despite the baseless defense chosen by Casey Anthony, the family believes that the jury made a fair decision based on the evidence presented, the testimony presented, the scientific information presented, and the rules that were given to them by the Honorable Judge Perry to guide them. The family hopes that they will be given the time by the media to reflect on this verdict and decide the best way to move forward privately. Casey Anthony would leave Florida for an undisclosed location not long after the verdict. However, on August 12th, she was ordered to return to serve a year's supervised probation for an unrelated check fraud conviction. Casey returned on August 25th and served her probation in an undisclosed location. Due to numerous threats against her life, the Florida Department of Corrections did not enter her information into the state parolee database. In August 2011, George and Cindy issued a statement that Casey would not be living with them in their home when she returned to Florida to serve her probation. According to the Huffington Post, she was reportedly working with her probation officer to take online college classes in an unspecified field while protected by her security at an undisclosed educational institution. In August 2011, the Florida Department of Children and Families released a report based on a 3-year investigation into Kaylee's disappearance and death. An agency spokesperson stated, "It is the conclusion of the DCF that Casey failed to protect her child from harm either through her actions, which tragically resulted in the child's untimely death." In March 2017, Casey gave an interview with the Associated Press, saying she understood the reasons people feel about her and noting as to the cause of her daughter's death. "As I am here today, I can't tell you one way or another. The last time I saw my daughter, I believed she was alive and was going to be okay, and that's what was told to me." Casey later participated in a documentary, Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, in which she discussed her life before, during, and after the trial. Now, if you want to hear some on the lawsuits that she was dealing with after the trial, you can check that out on my Patreon in the more extended version of this story. But I'm going to continue on with the other facts of the case. Now, since the end of the trial, various movements have arisen for the creation of a new law called Kaylee's Law that would impose stricter requirements on parents to notify law enforcement of the death or disappearance of a child. One such petition circulated via change.org has gained nearly 1.3 million electronic signatures. In response to this and other petitions, lawmakers in 4 states, Florida, Oklahoma, New York, and West Virginia, have begun drafting versions of Kaylee's Law since 2011. The law in Oklahoma would require a child's parent or guardian to notify police of a missing child within 24 hours and would also stipulate a time frame for the notification of the disappearance of a young child under the age of 12. The Florida law would make it a felony if a parent or legal guardian fails to report a missing child in a timely manner, if they could have known the child would be in danger. The call for mandatory reporting laws has been criticized as being reactive, overly indiscriminating, and even counterproductive. One critic noted the law could lead to over-compliance and false reports by parents wary of becoming suspects, wasting police resources and leading to legitimate abductions going uninvestigated during the critical first few hours. Additionally, innocent people could get snared in the law for searching for a child instead of immediately calling police. Now, here's the real kicker. In November 2012, Orlando station WKMG-TV reported that police never investigated Firefox browser evidence on Casey's computer the day of Kaylee's death. They only looked at Internet Explorer evidence. Now, this was a time before everyone used Chrome, so Internet Explorer and Firefox were the two big browsers that everyone was on. So the browser history showed that someone at the Anthony household, using a password-protected account Casey used Firefox to do a Google search for foolproof suffocation at 2:51 p.m. and then clicked on an article criticizing pro-suicide websites promoting foolproof ways to die, including the idea of committing suicide by taking poison and putting a plastic bag over one's head. The browser then recorded activity on MySpace, the early Facebook, which was a site used by Casey, not George. The station learned about this information from Baez, who mentioned it in his book on the case, speculating that George had contemplated suicide after Kaylee's death. He conceded to reporters that the records are open to interpretation. However, he speculated that the state may have chosen not to introduce this search at trial because, according to Baez, the computer records tend to refute the timeline stated by George, which was that Casey left at 12:50 p.m. An analysis by John Goetz, a retired engineer and computer expert in Connecticut, revealed that Casey's password-protected computer account shows activity on the computer at 1:39 p.m., with activity on her AIM account, as well as MySpace and Facebook. On November 29, 2022, a docu-series was released on Peacock, directed by Alexandra Dean, titled Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. In an interview with USA Today, Dean said that Casey's pathological lying was a defense mechanism caused by her alleged SA, and that police never looked at her father as a suspect in Kaylee's disappearance. Which now brings us to March 1st, 2025, the day Casey joined TikTok to announce a new career as a legal advocate promoting Substack. She says she's planning to use Substack to advocate for women, the LGBTQ community, and her deceased daughter, Kaylee. In one of her videos, she explains how she plans to share advice and be accessible to users through email, which she also hopes will refine her public image. Casey now says that her pregnancy was the result of getting drugged and raped at a house party when she was 18. But with all of her lies, I think it's just more attention seeking. I think I speak for most women when I say we definitely don't need women like Casey Anthony advocating for us. And she certainly shouldn't be advocating for that sweet little girl she killed. Now you Gen Zers and younger millennials are all caught up as to pretty much why everyone who was at least 5 years old in 2008 hates Casey Anthony. It's because her facts don't add up. And had the prosecution remembered to bring up that Firefox search information in the trial, she probably wouldn't have gotten off. Casey Anthony may just be the millennial generation's O.J. Simpson, except nobody was really divided on this verdict. All of America believes, to this day, that she killed her daughter and got away with it. Well, that concludes this week's episode of Stormi Talks True Crime, The Girl with the Bella Vita Tattoo. My personal opinion is obviously that she was guilty and got away with murder. So I firmly believe that it should be our duty to make sure Kaylee at least gets some justice by making sure she forever remains a social pariah. Feel free to discuss your thoughts on this story in the comments below or give suggestions on other cases you may want to hear about. Remember to like the video and subscribe to my Girls Rock Productions channel while you are here, and check out some of my other playlists. On Stormi Teaches Music, I do covers and guitar lessons on Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Eastern. Now, the covers are released on Mondays, and the lesson for the song that is covered will be on Wednesdays. These live lessons will be done on my Patreon at 9 a.m. Eastern on Wednesdays. On Stormi Talks Ghost Stories, I talk about some different haunted cities each month and tell true ghost stories out of those cities. These videos are posted Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, I do daily live streams on my Patreon for Stormi Does Art, where I have different topics each day that I cover while painting some of my original artwork. You can check out some clips of those videos on my Stormi Does Arts playlist here on my Girls Rock Productions channel. And also, if you want to help donate money to this channel but don't want to join the Patreon, just want to do a one-time donation, I will have you can actually use the QR codes for my Venmo or CashApp here on the screen, or there is a link to both in my description box below. Now, I hope you did enjoy this story, and I will see you next week on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern with next week's video on Stormi Talks True Crime. And until then, have a great week and stay safe.